Um, the event that I decided to talk about in my capstone paper was the Bleeding Kansas event. And Bleeding Kansas event um, was a very impactful part of the Civil War. Um, and it made a difference on how the Civil War was fought. Most people wouldn't know that, but it really changed the way that the Civil War was fought. And it all started um, with the passage of the Kansas Nebraska Act. Um, the Kansas Nebraska Act was something that was not supposed to, but like they wanted it to resolve slavery, but it actually had the opposite effect that they wanted. Um, and so much um, political bickering occurred during this, and um, when the bill was passed, it allowed both the citizens of Nebraska and Kansas to allow slavery in the territories um, that they were on, and one of the events in Bleeding Kansas was the sacking of Lawrence. Um, the sacking of Lawrence was impactful because um, Sheriff Jones had followed Free Staters to Lawrence, and it was fortified, and then Sheriff Lawrence was shot. So to retaliate, he went back and with people because he didn't want to lose. He went back and decided to destroy many things. Um, um, as stated in this extra history video, Sheriff Jones returned on May 21st with an army of 800 border ruffians. Now, a similar standoff the previous year had been de-escalated, but not this time. The border ruffians surrounded Lawrence, disarmed the residents, and sacked the town. They broke windows and destroyed a legislator's house. They smashed the presses of two abolishment newspapers, and they attacked the largest, strongest building in the town, the Free State Hotel. First with a cannon, then detonating gunpowder in the lobby, and when none of this worked, simply by burning it down. The attack on Lawrence wasn't the only thing that was impactful for the Bleeding Kansas event. Another one was the um um the Potawatomi massacre, which was on the night of May 24th of 1856, where Brown and his men pulled 5 pro-slavery men out of their homes and butchered them. It was said that Brown wasn't one of the ones that killed the men, but like he had a hand in how the killings were done. One man that witnessed and was around during the time was Edward Brigham. And a quick backstory on Edward is from a letter from Edward Brigham, where it just tells you about him. It said Edward Brigham was one of the Northerners who came to Kansas during the period that became known as Bleeding Kansas. He grew up in Northampton, Massachusetts, and migrated to Kansas in 1856 at the age of 22. Brigham came simply to Homestead, but he was soon caught up in the fight over slavery. Letter from Edward Brigham. This letter really stood out to me. This primary source. It really stood out to me because Edward's letter was to his cousin Sidney, and it the way it talks about how the pro-slavery men were dealt with, and that he believed, even though um pro-slavery men were wrong in what they were doing, they may not have owned slaves, and they were completely butchered for being human, I guess. And Edward says in his letter to his cousin, was one of the parts in his letter to his cousin Sidney was, on our way back, we heard that 5 men had been killed by Free State men. They were butchered, ears cut off, and bodies thrown into the river. The murdered men, pro-slavery, had thrown out threats and insults, yet the act was barbarian and inhuman whoever committed by. Um, this violence was horrific, and Edward believed that as well. Um, it was like a domino effect that it was like a domino effect that kept happening. Um, in the lead up to Bleeding Kansas is important to learn why certain things happened in the Civil War. Um, one of the things that was impacted by the Civil War was national politics. Um, because they were trying to figure out what happened, like what was going to happen with slavery. The future of slavery was very unclear. Um, the many acts of violence directly impacted the Civil War, as the violence escalated very quickly during the Bleeding Kansas events. And even though there were many casualties, it was very exaggerated on how many casualties there were. For example, record documents 150 homicides in Kansas between 1854 and 1861. Contemporary accounts indicate slavery-related turmoil only provoked only 56 of those, approximately 8 deaths a year. That was from American History Central. Um, Most people saw Bleeding Kansas as like a preview of what to come, um, as if it was like foreshadowing the events of the Civil War. Um, in the video Bleeding Kansas Prelude to the Civil War, it was stated, national politics through Bleeding Kansas is today perhaps best understood as a preview of what to come in organized battles between mostly northern free status and mostly southern pro-slavery forces in the sacking and burning of towns and the massacres of people on the other side of the Little Drive. We can see a clear prelude to the fight that would soon consume the nation. Um, this topic is so important because it's a very um important thing to understand why certain things happened in the Civil War. Um I personally believe that it was a preview of what to come because of what the Civil War was fought for. And my takeaways uh from this I learned a lot of unexpected things about this event because I didn't know it existed. And my least favorite part, I think, was research, but it was fun overall.